Christian empires. In 1600, the desire for fur began to reshape northern North America. Aboriginal groups who wanted to trade for European goods traveled great distances to get the furs from other groups. Indigenous people were occupying new territories, they were forming alliances with Europeans, and sometimes fighting alongside them against their enemies. The Huron and the French were allied against the Iroquois and the Dutch to the south of Lake Ontario, and after the Dutch, the English. But European monarchs who engaged in exploration and conquest during this time were motivated by something as strong as trade, and that was their religious beliefs, their Catholic faith, in most cases, and their desire to glorify God. One of their beliefs was that they needed to convert Indigenous people to Christianity. And increasingly, after the Catholic Reformation, this meant sending missionaries, mostly Roman Catholic priests at this time, to the Indigenous people in order to convert them. This was a much more invasive form of contact between Europeans and Indigenous people than the trade in furs. So let's look at a quick example of this. So one of the early participants in the fur trade, a colleague or an employee, so to speak, of Samuel de Champlain, was a man named Etienne Brulé. And Etienne Brulé was a young man sent to live among the Huron in 1610. Champlain sent him to learn the Huron language, to learn the custom of the Huron, and also to travel with them to better understand their culture, but also to see parts of the country that he wouldn't be able to see otherwise, and then to give that information to Champlain. So he was essentially being trained to be a translator and a guide. He did this very well. In fact, he did such a great job of learning the language and adopting the customs that Champlain felt that he was becoming slightly too close to the Huron and sent him home to France in the late 1620s. But the point here is that fur traders believed that they needed to, in order to maintain their alliances, they needed to respect the Indigenous ways of doing things, respect their beliefs, and work alongside them because they relied on their cooperation. Fur traders were hesitant about missionaries because they feared that missionaries would upset these fur trade alliances. They were concerned that Indigenous people would not enjoy being asked to change their beliefs and that they would stop trading. On the St. Lawrence River, the first group of missionaries arrived from France in 1615. This group was known as the Récollets, and they conducted missions among the Algonquian people, but they had very little success. One of the reasons they were unsuccessful is because they expected Indigenous people to be, in their words, civilized or Europeanized before they could become Christian. So by this, the Récollets meant that Algonquin people should be acting in their daily lives the way that European Christians acted, practicing chastity before marriage, monogamy, gender segregation, gender roles, work ethic. All of these aspects of Christianity were supposed to be evident among the Algonquin before they would be ready to convert. And this made Christianity a harder sell and conversion a longer process. The Récollets also had trouble keeping up with the Algonquins. They were very nomadic. They had seasonal rotating sites that they visited to hunt and to fish. The Huron were in many ways better suited to being the receptors of missionaries. So, and the church quickly recognized this. The Huron were an agricultural people at the time. They lived mostly in one place. The fact that they practiced agriculture, to missionaries' view, was kind of evidence that they were more intelligent or more advanced, because that's the way that missionaries viewed agriculture as an industry. There was also a geographic advantage in working with the Huron, or missionizing the Huron, missioning to the Huron, pardon me, and that was that this would connect the missionaries to the Great Lakes, because the Huron territory was adjacent to Lake Huron, and this would give them connections to future converts further north. So in the early 1630s, the Jesuits were sent to mission among the Huron. And they built a mission center there in 1639. This was called Sainte Marie, and it was built in what the French called Huronia, or Huron territory. The idea was that the missionaries would live separately from the Huron in their own settlement, and this would be a place where converted Huron would come to worship and even to live. The Jesuits were quite successful at adapting Christian religion to the Huron beliefs. And so, for example, they ensured that they had images of Christian stories and Christian icons that the Huron would be able to understand, as well as translating documents into a written Huron language, even writing Christmas carols like the Huron Carol, so that the Huron could understand the story of the birth of Jesus, set in the kind of in Huronia as opposed to in the Middle East. Shortly after the Jesuits arrived, the Hurons suffered a very serious epidemic of smallpox. Between 1636 and 1641, between half and 2/3 of the population of Huronia was destroyed. Some of the Hurons accused the missionaries of practicing magic to bring the disease upon the Huron. But despite this, the Huron continued to tolerate missionaries because they feared that they would lose their trading connection with the French if they kicked the missionaries out. They also did not want to lose the military protection that the French had promised, especially after they lost so many of their population to smallpox. Alongside the missionaries that arrived at this time, religious orders began to establish themselves in the fur trading forts and small settlements in the French territory. So the Jesuits built a college meant to teach boys and prepare them for the priesthood, although in most cases these were indigenous boys. And so they were not expected to actually become priests, but they could potentially help to convert others in their community. In 1639, the Ursulines, which were a female religious order, cloistered order of nuns, arrived in Canada under the guidance of Marie de l'Incarnation. And this group built a religious school for Indigenous girls. Along similar lines, 2 years later, the Société de Notre-Dame founded a religious settlement called Ville-Marie. This became the city of Montreal, but it was founded on the idea of being an island apart, a very religious, cloistered place, and a hospital was built there as well. So my point in telling you about these institutions was basically that a lot of this, what we would consider social services of this very small fur trade settlement, were provided by members of the religious orders, education and health, and also helping people who might be ill or impoverished. This would have happened. This would have been the work of nuns and priests.